Good morning, everyone. It is 8:04, and we are going to begin the Finance Committee meeting on this October 24th. So good morning, everyone. Hope sounds like everybody's starting to get sick. So drink that OJ and take your vitamins and stay warm because the weather's starting to change. Before we start our agenda today, I want to introduce two new members of the Finance Committee for this year. This is the first time that we have student representatives attending. Um, and it's Sanaya Mann and Suri Ann Hera Stacy. Did I pronounce your names correctly? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so welcome. We're going to go through the agenda. And at any time, if you do have any comments, feedback, or questions, please don't hesitate to engage in dialogue with the group. Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen, so just give me a moment here. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so we have two agenda items today. The first, I'm going to give a financial update on the capital projects that are going on around the district. And then our second agenda item, and believe it or not, yes, it's time to start planning for the 25-26 budget. So always a fun time. So um, let me get started here. I wanted to give an update on the first $10 million that we did a bond issuance for in our $10 million plan for all of our projects and the middle school renovation. For those that were at the last year's meeting, this is something similar that you saw as far as me tracking to kind of show where the funds have been spent and kind of where we are with the different projects that are coming out of this bond issuance. And for the new student representatives, just real quickly, when we do certain projects within the difference, we make a decision on whether or not we're going to borrow the money for those projects, or they can come from our reserves or they can come out of our capital reserve. So for the projects that you see here, in the different phases, we made the decision that we were going to go out for long-term borrowing, and that's what we did. We did a just under $10 million bond issuance to fund the projects that you're seeing on the screen right now. So at any time, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate, okay? So out of this first $10 million issuance, we earmarked the money for 3 phases of replacing the entire high school roof because it was out of warranty. We are wrapping up phase two. You'll see that the spend in phase two is not that heavy right now, but that's because of all the punch list work and the things that we encountered with Jotun as we were doing this phase two of this project. So the budget did come in at 1.67 million. I expect that we will fully extend that, maybe not the full amount because there were some soft costs and some contingencies in there. So we might be a little bit under budget right now. But right now, with all of the additional work that had to be done by Jotun, we're still trying to go through that path of figuring out what they're paying for with the cleanup and finishing up the project. We started to discuss the partial roof replacement for phase three with CHA, formerly known as Dewey. So that's Doug Taylor. Just so that everybody knows, we're going to move forward in a little bit of a different capacity, and we can talk about this in property committee a little bit more detailed at our next property committee meeting. But we're going to do a process in which, because the roof is so sensitive, when you have different contractors working in phases, like if you have a different roofing company doing phase one, then one's doing phase two, you're not getting consistent work with the roof. So we are going to look at in phase three, doing it's a cooperative thing where you can basically identify the vendors that you want to bid on the project. And there's a process so that we're still meeting the state guidelines of bidding, but we're not actually going out to RFP and have to take the lowest responsible bidder for opening it up to all bids so that we can kind of make sure that we're consistent and we get a good roofing company so that we don't have the issues that we had with phase two. So more information is coming from that, but we will start that project once school is ended in the summer of 2025. So that is an estimated budget amount because we won't know until bids are open. The track and field renovations, this has been broken out into two phases. So the first phase, which is completed, was the track, the blue rubberized track. We also did the football field goalpost. We also did the field hockey sodding. Phase two is going on now. If you see the fencing and the construction that's happening, we are completing the components for the middle school track so that we are able to host track and field at the middle school in this spring. So we're putting a shot put and a long jump. Is that correct? Is it long jump or high jump? I always get them high jump. It's the high jump. Long jump was already done in the first phase. So those renovations are being done now. We're also doing some ADA compliance things in order for people to access that area, as well as putting bleachers in. So that will be helpful for parents when they come to watch the different events, that they have somewhere to sit and cheer on their children. The Erdenheim ramp, that project is almost complete. I believe the remaining railings were being picked up. I believe we should be wrapping that up either at the end of this week or very early next week. So if you haven't seen it, take a ride by Erdenheim. It is the work was really well done. It now connects the upper lot and upper playground to the bottom playground. And it gives ADA access. So we're continuing along with our universal design around the campus with these different projects. The final one, and this is the big project that we have going on, we've been in design phase. We are just wrapping that up, and we are going out to bid. Very exciting stuff at the middle school, and we will be starting construction around the February, March. We'll be awarding contracts and then starting that process. It's all phased out. That was identified in the property committee meeting with the different phases, but that project will wrap up in December of 2026. So that's where we're at with our first round of financing for the projects that we earmarked them for. Any questions on this page?
None from me.
No? Okay. So the second page is just to talk about moving forward and what that looks like. So we talked about this as when we made the decision to do the middle school project about how we were going to move forward to pay for it and what that would look like. So we went with a multiple financing or borrowing strategy. What that means is that the borrowings are spread over different calendar years. And for the students that are joining us, when you're the way that I talk about bond financing in our debt, I give the analogy of getting a credit card. You apply for a credit card, you have great credit, you get $100,000 limit on your credit card. So then you have to make decisions because just because you have $100,000 to spend doesn't mean you can afford to make that monthly payment if you max out your credit card within like 10 days because you go on a crazy shopping spree. So you have to think about managing your credit and being able to manage the amount of money that lenders are giving to you. So that's kind of similar to bond issuances is we take a look at what our capacity is to be able to borrow based on us doing previous borrowings and what's available to us. So putting the borrowings over multiple years allows us to be able to afford that minimum payment because we have to pay our annual debt payment every year. So that number is a pretty decent number. For every $10 million that we borrow, it adds about a little over $500,000 to our budget. So like I said, if we did 20 million or 30 million all at once, we have to be able to make room in our budget for about almost $1.6 million of new money to be able to absorb the new credit that we were doing. So working with our financial advisors, we decided to go on this strategy where we're looking at doing $10 million per year. These $10 million per year borrowings are called bank qualified bonds, which give us lower interest rates and better call features. So in 2023, we did the $10 million bond. The partial amount was earmarked for the project. That was the slide that I just previewed. And then 2024, we did that borrowing last year. We have not touched that money, but once the bids come in and we start to rock and roll, we're going to start digging into that money pretty quickly. And that money is 100% earmarked for the middle school project. So we still have two borrowings left to fully satisfy paying for the project. The plan was 25 and 26. I spoke to Jamie Doyle and Carly from PFM, who are our financial advisors, to start to set up looking at what 2025 looks like so that we can get finance committee meetings and get everybody prepared for that borrowing and getting information for that presentation. And one of the things that, because of the timeline of the project that we are ending in December of 2026, but a lot of the work is going to be done by August of 2026. She wants to make sure that we are going to have enough money to be able to get us through the 25 year into the early 26 year. So we requested a draw schedule from Doug Taylor to determine what amounts we're going to need to make sure that we don't need more than the 10 million when we do this next borrowing. Because normally the borrowings happen, we start the process in February. We end up getting board approval in March. Then we usually have a settlement date around end of April, early May. So if you think about doing that in 26, if the crux of the project is going to be done in August, she just wants to make sure that we're not stuck or we're not short with the funding that we need to pay vendors in that 26 year. So more to come on the on that information at the finance committee meeting. And I put meetings out, but they're tentatively scheduled. Right now, I just kind of wanted to get on calendars and kind of timeline this out for budget and for different action items that I'm going to need from the finance committee meeting. So sometime in February, we will be having a finance committee meeting in which PFM will do a presentation to talk about what our 2025 borrowing plan will look like at that time. Any questions on that?
Sounds good.
Okay. Anybody else?
No questions here.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the 25-26 budget timeline overview. And this is really just a very, very high level. Neil, you've been on this committee, so these slides will look very familiar to me. I'd like to keep it so that it's consistent, so that we're all on the same page on this process. So we start with our guiding principles that lead us on how on what we're doing to develop the budget, like what things that we're looking at. I won't go through these, but it identifies goals and things that we want to make sure that our budget is being able to fund and the resources that we're providing for our teachers and our students in order for us to meet the needs and make students learners and citizens who are high achieving, resilient, and responsible in the global community, changing community. The process, how do we create the budget to build the school budget, create and build a school budget? So my office, with the help of Sam, and Sam did a great job last year in building the revenue budget. So we use a 5-year historical trend data, the current economic climate, and then we rely on outside sources such as our Berkheimer, who is our local EIT tax collector, our current real estate tax collector, PDE with state information, subsidy information. So we gather that information. We look historically to see what trends are happening, and then we basically do our budgeting. There are some knowns because we have grants, we have title funding. Those informations are knowns, and then there's some that we look at historical growth and look at trends that we might be able to move up or move down based upon what's happening in the current climate, economic climate. And then starting on the expense side, the biggest piece of our budget is our personnel budget. That's salaries and benefits. That makes up about 72 to 78% of our overall budget. So in conjunction with Ms. Kerr, who is our human resources director, uh, we create the personnel budget looking at salary data that's reflective of all the contracts that we have settled. As you know, at the end of this year, we have 3 groups that their contracts will be expiring. So we will be working throughout the year to make sure that we have renewals in place before the start of new school year. But we will use that salary data and the information in those contracts to build the budget with salaries. I work with Ms. Kerr to make sure that benefit information is reflective, such as our healthcare rates, PSERS rates, anything that has to do with benefits in our contracts. And then the other thing that we do is just make sure that we're keeping an eye on enrollment. Um, Dr. Yannicone, with the Office of Teaching and Learning, and myself, we really take a look at this to make sure that we're not having any unusual spikes. I think since I've been here, we've been on trend from what our enrollment projection study has been saying. So I think we feel very confident in that enrollment study, and we utilize that, but we do pay attention to make sure that there's no new developments, that there's nothing happening within the township that's going to add to our enrollment. And then it drills down into the department. Budget administrators, they build their budget based on a zero-based budget. The department and buildings are a little bit different. I started that trend with this current budget that we're in. Department administrators, for the most part, stay consistent once they kind of flatline their budget and really get in there. But I'll use an example is the 24-25 budget was the first budget that Dr. Dennis did, our student services director did. So I want to make sure that, she has that historical data as she leads the department and changes that might be happening to give her the flexibility to be able to move up and down as opposed to say, here's your allocation and you have to stay within that allocation. So the department budget administrators, they build their budgets based on a zero-based budget. Everybody, I believe, is in a pretty good place where we're not going to see big spikes. We've kind of managed that over the last 3 years, so that we feel pretty strongly that their budgets are consistent to meet the needs on what they need. And then the building budget administrators, they create their budget based on an allocation determined by myself. And I basically look at the 5-year historical trend of spend and what their budget is. And then we also go through a process that if there are new things that are happening with needs, wants, and wishes, that we make sure that we have those discussions. They coordinate in the middle school and the high school, and the elementaries with building department heads and team leaders to make sure that they're getting feedback from the people that have boots on the ground within the classrooms to make sure that those needs are getting addressed. And then something that we started last year really emphasizing is creating recycle placement programs in both the departments and the buildings. So the building administrators will work with, we'll use music as an example to make sure that when they're having the music discussion about budget, that if there's instruments, they have an inventory of them that need to be replaced in any given year, that we're aware of it, because then they're doing a 5-year replacement program and a 5-year replacement cycle, so that there's no surprises of, hey, our Steinway is going now, and now we need a new piano. Instead of doing that, they inventory that and create a recycle program so that we're aware and that's shared and we have an idea. Any questions on this big overview of how we build the budget? No?
Yeah.
The one thing that I do want to note, this year I have procured Forecast 5, which is a forecasting model. I've been talking about this for the last couple of years, and in my hope in building out a 5-year projection so that when we're making decisions and we're building the budget, we can see how this is going to impact in future years. So I do have that model. I'm working with Frontline to implement it and make sure that we get all the data correctly in there and the setups right so that I can start forecasting. So at a future meeting, we will have our first forecasted 5-year outlook when it comes to finance, which I think will be very helpful when making decisions and things coming up, such as, negotiations, building projects, and other projects that we have. As you know, for those who serve on the property committee meeting, we're also doing a capital assessment plan. Doug Taylor is wrapping that up. We're chomping at the bit to get our hands on that. It'll be presented to the property committee when it's done. And from that, Dr. Yannicone, Mr. Watley, and myself will begin to build a 5-year capital plan that has solid numbers that have been researched. It identifies everything in the district, not just capital, but also operational. So we'll know how old our boilers are, when they need to be replaced, how much that cost is going to be, so that we can really build out and financially align with our operations and our facilities, all of our needs. So that's something that's coming down the pike this year, and I'm very excited about that. So this is Act One index history. I actually had to take off 3 lines so that we can make sure that we get the projections out here, but I don't know if you guys really need to know back in 2015 what was happening. I think we're past that a little bit and we kind of get the picture. So I did take off a couple of the lines if you do a comparative slide. But what this does is this allows us to get a snapshot of where we land in the county in the spreadsheet that I have, the state of our relative wealth in our district, the Act One index, which for the new students, we have to go through a project. We have to go through a process in building a budget in which there is a calculation done, and it is published every year by September 30th by the state that tells us how much we are allowed to, what percentage we're allowed to raise our current tax rate without going out to the voters and asking them if we can raise it even more. So historically, as you can see in the third column, that is the Act One index. So we are allowed to raise taxes in 25, 26, 4%. Historically, as you'll see on the very last column, something that we're very proud of in Springfield is that we have historically come under the index. And we try to stay below the index. That is something that the board has notated to both Dr. Yannicone and myself that that is a wish of theirs, that when we are building the budget, to try to keep it that they want to stay under, because that mitigates the burden on taxpayers and paying their tax bill. But we have done, I think we've done a great job of mitigating that and making sure that, we're meeting the needs of what everybody wants. We're providing budgets that don't have massive cuts. We are making sure that we identify things that are needed within the district, providing resources, maintaining our facilities, while also being responsible to the taxpayers. So that's what this chart shows you. Looked at the MVPI aid ratio, you see that it slightly ticked up a little bit. We've been living in that 0.155, 1500 land, which that puts us on the, when you look at the scale, it puts us on one of the top third wealthiest districts in the state. And when we benchmark against the county, the same, that ticked a little bit higher. It's not that much higher. We're still in that top third. When I was doing the comparisons, and the calculation is very, very complex. So they basically take uh, market value within your district, benchmark that against market value in the state, which is your housing, personal income, benchmark that within your township against the state. They look at your weighted enrollment, and then they benchmark that against the state's weighted enrollment. And then there's a multiplication that's done, and then voila, that shoots out this ratio. So when I looked at that, you can see some fluxes in the personal income, some market value information, some state information. So there's nothing that's glaring that I think we should be concerned about. There are districts that are all the way up to 0.4600, which indicates that they are a very high poverty um, district. That is not the case when you see this. And that little uptick does not mean that we are now on the trend that things are going to change dramatically within the district and we are going to become a very high poverty district. That's not what that means. It's just an uptick on those factors that I just talked about, which I think with our current economic times, you can understand why maybe some of those things are happening. Could be the move-ins, the move-outs within the township, because that's where they benchmark the information from. Do you have any questions about that? No? Okay, the one other thing on this slide that I just kind of want to notate, you'll see starting in 2023, in the last couple years, our Act One index has been above 4. And last year it was at 5.3. You'll see that the trend is going down in the future. So we have to really be cognizant about that, that our ability to be able to leverage and build mills is going to start to shrink in the future, with these projections that are happening. So that's why that's important, just to pay attention to the trend that it is going to start to go down. Any questions? Nope. Okay, and then this is the last slide, and it's easy peasy first meeting for the year. Just wanted to show you kind of where we're at and just a sketch of what we're thinking of when we want to have finance committee meetings. Nothing is set in stone, but at least in the months, that's where we kind of, in the timing of the months, that's where we kind of need to land. So we're having our finance committee meeting now, and it's giving the overview of the budget. We are looking at a November 8th finance committee meeting, in which the audit will be presented, and then we'll continue our discussion about the budget. I'll have some more information as far as fixed costs that I know of, talk about things that have come out already that are going to impact next year's budget. So it'll be some assumptions in me building the budget that we can have some discussion on. And then November 19th at the regular board meeting, we are going to have an action item coming out of the November 8th meeting, of having the board approve the accelerated budget opt-out resolution, which we have done consistently since I have been here. And basically, it's just saying that the board is certifying that they will not raise taxes over the Act One index, which is 4%. And that falls right in line and nicely with what our goals are for budget anyway. And then, like I said, in February, we're looking at a finance committee meeting at some point mid-February, to have the PFM do their preview and their planning for how we're going to continue to fund or finish funding the middle school project. We'll continue on with our budget discussion. From here on out, budget will be discussed at every finance committee meeting in one form or another. I'm looking at about March 6th for the first look at budget. And then looking at, now this is a tighter timeline and this is subject to change. I always like to give myself wiggle room on a board meeting at the end of the year in case as we go through things. What happened last year with the homestead farmstead, and we had to do a special board meeting to do the resolution and correct that. So I'm giving myself a minute to make sure that if anything were to happen or change dramatically, we have another board meeting before June 30th, to make changes to the final budget approval. So right now, the trajectory is that April 10th, we will have a finance committee meeting. And it will, and I'm sorry, that should say 25, 26. It'll be the 25, 26 proposed final budget look. So that gives us a little over a month between when you look at the first look and when the proposed comes back. We still have time after that because the final budget won't be passed until June 3rd. So we still have some time if there's questions or if there's changes or if anything happens. I think we've built in enough time for that to happen and for communication to happen. And then at the April 22nd board meeting is when we will request that the board approve the proposed final budget. And then the June 3rd interim board meeting is we'll have the final approval of budget. And again, this is a very light schedule. This is my first hit at the schedule, so it's subject to change depending on if we need to maneuver. But I think I've built in enough time that we have the ability to move or maneuver. The other reason that that April date is so early, part of what PDE requires is a 30-day window in between the approval of your proposed final budget and your final budget. So you basically you start at the board meeting that you want your final budget to be approved at, and you count backwards to make sure you're hitting that 30-day window. And we just missed the 30-day window with the first meeting in May. So that's why I had to back it up to April. So that's why it kind of looks like there's a lot of time in between the two approvals because we have to meet that 30-day window requirement. Any questions on this tentative budget timeline?
None for me. This sounds good.
No questions here.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. That is it for my presentation today. If there are no questions from anybody, do the student representative, any questions? Are you falling asleep? Did I make you sleepy before you have to go back to class? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you both for joining us. We're super excited that we have student representatives on our committee. And believe me, it gets fun moving forward with the budget process. You guys will learn a lot. So, and please don't hesitate. If you have any questions, there's no question that you can't ask, okay? Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. If no one has anything else, have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks again.